I have an instance of Native Instruments Massive in my Cubase software here, and I have a few things going on here. So I'm just going to take this one step at a time and walk you through this, starting with the Massive patch itself. So I'm going to open up this patch here and just take you for a little walk around about what's happening. So I have two oscillators active, and both of them are pitched way up. Now, this oscillator in particular, you'll notice is slightly detuned from oscillator 1. What that gives you is a little bit of a stereo effect. Similar to what I have going down over here, I'm just going to open up the second instance of Massive, and I just have a simple patch, which is two saw waves, and they're both detuned an octave to get them down into the low end in the bass. And one is detuned up 0.04 semitones, and the other one is detuned down 0.05. So what that does, having this two oscillators detuned from each other, is it gives you this sort of stereo spread type sound. Here, check it out. As opposed to the single. Okay. So back up to this first patch over here. So inside of Massive, I have the two oscillators, like I've said, and they're both the hard sync wavetable. Okay. And I've selected over here the bend minus plus, which gives it a little bit more grit. And additionally, I have a little bit of modulation happening. I have to the pitch assigned envelope 2 and 1, and as you'll notice that they're both detuned way down. So what that does is, because these are pitched up so high, and these are detuned down, it kind of brings it right back down into the lower bass tones. Now, what we have happening here is we have a little bit of a pluck right at the very beginning of the sound, and that's what these two envelopes are doing, which I'll get into in a second. I also have some modulation from LFO6 to the wavetable position on oscillator 1. So I'm just going to stretch this MIDI pattern out just a little bit, just so you can hear the difference, just so you can hear exactly what's happening there. Bring that bad boy up, and there we go. And pay attention to the modulation. Yeah, so I'm just using that to get a little bit of a movement happening inside the bass on just oscillator 1. I don't have it on oscillator 2. It's still the original signal, just to kind of give it a subtle texture, not necessarily subtle, but just to give it an extra texture and movement to the sound, but not through both oscillators, just so it's not too dramatic. And over here on the amplitude on each oscillator, I have it's assigned to the Performer 5 modulation. And what's happening over here as well is I have the rate set to this chop macro here. So what this does is this initial section right here lets these two envelopes kind of stay their course a bit without having the sound cut off. And the more that I turn up this macro, the more choppy the sound gets. It's good for getting sort of kind of a glitchy, choppy type effect here. Check it out. Just a little something fun to play around with. Okay, so back up to the oscillators here and the envelope 2 and 1 on the pitch. So what I have happening here is the attack and level all the way down. The decay over here is just a little bit of a pinch. It's about 25%, and this levels all the way up, and that's really important, and I'll show you in a second. And just a little bit of release, not too much. And in envelope 1, pretty similar settings. The only difference is you'll see the attack and level are the same. The only difference is the decay is turned up just a little bit more, and the release is also turned up a little bit more. So the important part of these two envelopes in the pitch is the decay, actually. So what this is doing is, with an elongated decay, you'll have more of a slower dive, as you'll hear, and with the decay down, you'll have a really quick dive, which gives you kind of pluck punch to the very beginning of your sound. I'm really huge on getting that pluck and punch from bass using the envelopes on the pitch. It's a really effective tool to get that initial punch to your bass sound. So I highly recommend playing around with that. So I'm just going to show you what's going on here with the decay, and so you can audibly hear the difference between the decay settings. So check it out. Anyways, I could play around all day, obviously. And envelope 1 is doing pretty much an identical thing. It's just adding a little bit of extra strength to this pitch down that's happening here, this rapid pitch down that's giving you that pluck. Anyways, yeah, I love it. So I highly recommend playing around with that. Very effective. There's also a few other things happening inside of this patch here, so we're going to go explore that. Over in the voicing tab here, I have the unisono set up to 4. So the voicing tab is almost self-explanatory. If you take a human voice and you have one person singing at a time versus having 4 people singing at a time, you get this whole new depth and body and warmth to the sound. Okay, so also important is this unisono spread section over here where I have the pitch and the pan turned to on. The pan is panned just slightly at about 10%. So what that does is these 4 different voices is it slightly pans all of them. So it even further enhances the stereo spread that you get from this type of a Reece bassline. It's not like a traditional Reece because I've used a different wavetable, but you get that same stereo bass type effect. Also, I have over here, I have the macro 2, which I've titled Reece Me, to the pitch. So what that does is this macro at 100%, you'll see there's not a huge area that's affected here. It's only a very small amount. I've chosen that on purpose because I don't want to trash the sound too bad. I just want to get just a nice little amount of stereo happening. So as soon as this macro is turned up and it naturally moves this slider just over to the very tail end of this yellow bar here, these 4 voices also get slightly detuned from each other, which further enhances that stereo spread effect that you get. So let's hear the difference there. Yeah, so lots of fun. I also have over here in the effects section a little bit of classic tube with the dry, wet, and drive set to midnight. The thing about adding distortion is you can very easily trash and destroy your audio signal. So with distortion, the less is more rule should always be applied. The effects 2 section, I have the dimension expander, which is sort of a spatial reverby delay type effect. And once again, less is more with this. The dry wet is just a pinch and ditto with the size. Now, the reason why you want less is more with stereo spatial effects is it can really dramatically push your bass to the very back of your mix, as opposed to being really up front and in your face like typically people want in their mix downs. So you got to be careful with things like reverbs and chorus and the dimension expander, which is currently relevant. Things like that. You got to be really careful about not using too much on your basses because it can really push it back in the mix. If you want your bass really up front, that is. So in the EQ section, I have a little bit of a low shelf boost and a high shelf boost just to give it a little bit of extra bite and a little bit extra balls on the low end. And that's the whole patch. Okay, so there's actually a lot more happening underneath the hood here. So I have some more, a little bit more of complex routing happening. So in Cubase, I've done a unique way of facilitating this. So these are my sends in Ableton. They're sends and returns. Send and return is the traditional music production term for it. I have my output is actually set to no bus, and which means that this initial massive track is not coming out my mixer. So what I have set up here is that it comes out this dry signal, and I'm just doing that just so you can hear the dry patch as it is. So we're going to actually deactivate that, and we're going to start activating these low, mids, and high sends here because I've done something called frequency splitting. So before I get into that, I just want to show you what I have on the initial massive track here. I have 2 of my favorite plugins of all time in the chain here, and I highly recommend checking these out. They're from the Melda bundle, like Zelda the video game, but with an M in the front, and these are game changer plugins. It's pretty much multi-band everything. Multi-band phaser, chorus, flanger, distortions, wave shapers, saturator, which is what I have here. And it's great because you have so much control over which band. You just right click or command click in a Mac and you insert your band, and the sky's the limit. You have about up to 6 bands, and you can boost and saturate unique areas of the spectrum to your heart's content. So on my basses, how I like to use that is just get my low band separated from 0 to about 100 hertz, and I just have a little bit of an extra boost happening there, a little bit of extra saturation, and ditto on the high end from about 3K or so, and there's about a 1 decibel boost there happening. So once again, getting that low end body and that high end bite. So this is probably my personal favorite out of this whole bundle. It's the multi-band chorus plugin. Now, one thing that's really important with modern bass lines is that you have this low-end punch while simultaneously having this beautiful, lush, wide stereo field on the top end. The quality for music production these days, the bar is set so high that the common listener almost demands these 2 things to be present in their basses, the low end punch and the beautiful top end stereo field. And this is my favorite plugin for helping me achieve that. So I have 2 bands set up here. My low band is from 0 to 2K. And my top band is from 2K to 20K. So my low band is totally dry. And this is what's beautiful about putting this on a bass, is this keeps my low end totally dry, and it helps me preserve that low end punch. So on my top end, you can see right here, if you didn't see it right there, there's my dry wet slider for band 1. So I'm going to select band 2, and I have it about 55% wet. So now I have just a little bit of extra stereo processing and spatial effect just on my top end alone, which adds this beautiful lushness to the top end. So I'm just going to turn that off just so you can hear it dry and then wet again. Yeah, so it makes a huge difference in the spatial effect and the body and the perception of how warm your sound is. So yeah, highly recommend it.